In this series of recordings, we're going to talk about the Android Activity Lifecycle, and we're also going to talk about a fundamental concept in object-oriented programming, which is inheritance. And we're going to demonstrate all this by using a location service. Now, so far in this class, allow me to resize Eclipse just a moment. So far in this class, I've talked about how you can hit a couple keys and you magically get a method. So Control M will focus on our GPS supplant activity. And if you remember, we had this thing called onCreate, and I said just type in onCR, hold Control space, and we'll get this method called onCreate. And there's several other methods like this. For example, if I go to the bottom and I say onRe with a capital R, Control space, this will fill in with onResume. Okay, and forgive me, it's running a little bit slow right now, but this will fill in with onResume. Now, where do these methods come from? How does it know we want these methods? Because remember, Java is an all-purpose programming language. We just happen to be using it here to write some Android applications. So how does it magically know about these methods that... One second. Okay, a little bit of resizing there. How does it magically know about these methods that we can just create? Well, that's the concept of inheritance in Java. Inheritance is best defined with a class diagram, and what I'm bringing over here is something called Argo Uml. Argo Uml I have used... Okay, one second. Argo Uml is a tool I have used in one form or another. Here we go, argouml.tigris.org. It is an open source and therefore free software. I've used this software at the university for, well, let's see, I've been at the university over 13 years. I've probably used this software probably about 11 or 12 of those 13 years. And it's very stable, it has been very predictable. It's very useful. What this does is this allows us to model our Java programs or any kind of object-oriented program. Right now I'm in what's called a class diagram. I'm going to choose New Class, and we're going to create a fairly typical example, a savings account. And if we think of what's in a savings account, we have things like a balance. So I can right-click and choose Add New Attribute. Uh-oh, where'd it go? Try it one more time. Okay, savings, enter, and then we're going to add a new attribute. Okay, and we're going to call this balance. Okay. Okay, and there we go. Okay, and then we can give it a method. We'll say add new operation, and we'll call this something like compute interest. And there we go. Okay, so this is a class that represents a savings object. Now let's say I want to represent a checking object. What I'll do is or a checking class. I'll grab another one of these boxes, and as you see from the savings class, we put the name of the class at the top, any attributes in the middle, and any methods down at the bottom. So for this one, we're going to say checking. Okay, checking has a balance, which we'll say is an integer again. There we go. And then it's going to have methods like, let's say, new operation, and we'll call this, again, compute interest. Okay, now along with balance, checking also has something called a check number. So, you know, and this is going back to the old days, but back in the old days, it used to be that if you had a check number go out of sequence, it would highlight on your statement. This is back when you used to get bank statements also. But if you would typically write checks out of a checkbook, and the check had a number on it, and the checkbooks usually had about 25 checks in them. If the bank saw a check from a different book, it would usually star it or flag it on your statement to make sure someone hadn't stolen the checkbook or something like that. So we might have an attribute called something like recent check number. Okay, and also checking accounts oftentimes have a monthly fee. So we could have a new attribute called monthly fee. Okay, now we also have things called certificate of deposit. So I'll make another class here for certificate of deposit. Okay, and within certificate of deposit, we will add an attribute for balance. Okay, and also certificate of deposit typically has a length to maturity. So you have a 5-year CD, or a 3-year CD, or a 1-month CD. A certificate deposit has some kind of length to maturity, which means you can't withdraw the money until that length to maturity has expired. And then once again, it's also going to have a method. We'll call this a new operation called compute interest. Now what you see here is that our 3 different classes have things that make them unique, but more importantly, they have things that are in common. Now, when classes have things that are in common, we want to share those. We don't want to duplicate those. Generally, in object-oriented programming, we want to reduce redundancy. So what we can do in that case is create a superclass. And I'll pop one out of checking here by clicking on this up arrow. Okay, this is what we'll call a superclass. A superclass could be something simple. We could just call it account. Okay. So the concept of what an account is. And then within account, what's something that all of these 3 have in common? Well, they all have a balance, don't they? So why don't we just put this up here, balance. Like so. And then as long as we have it up there, we don't need to repeat it in any subclasses. We can take it away, like so. Now you see we have an open arrow pointing up from what we call a subclass, which is checking, to the superclass, which is called account. So checking is the subclass. Checking inherits from or extends from account, and that's an important concept. This is what's called inheritance. Okay. Now from savings, I can go ahead and draw one of these arrows. Just drag and drop like that, and there we go. And you see now I have this same extends relationship between savings and account. So now for savings, we don't need to duplicate this balance variable. Instead, we can just inherit. I stress that word inherit. We can just inherit that variable. So no need to have any duplication. Certificate of deposit, let's create this relationship as well. And for balance, again, we will inherit that, so we don't need to duplicate it. Okay, now we see here we have new operation. Notice that compute interest is a method that's common across all 3 of these subclasses. So I'm going to change this to compute interest. And now take a look. We no longer need to include that in savings because we're going to have it up in account. We no longer need to have it in CD because we can inherit it from account. Checking. Do we need to keep it in checking? Well, let's consider that. Look at this. Savings is very simple. Savings is a very vanilla, a very generic account. Certificate of deposit is an account with one enhancement, one specific thing, which is that length to maturity. Okay. Checking, though, has a monthly fee. So when it computes interest, it actually needs to include that monthly fee. So it might need to do some extra specific logic related to that monthly fee. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to override the method compute interest. That means compute interest in the superclass account provides default behavior. Both savings and certificate of deposit inherit that default behavior. Checking, on the other hand, overrides that default behavior and provides some additional enhancements that are specific to a checking class. Okay, checking overrides that behavior. And believe it or not, that's what we have been doing all along in our class, in our activity. If we take a look at this activity, this is called GPS a plant, and it extends activity. Extends. Remember I talked about extends. That's what this arrow indicates here. Arrow indicates extension. Okay, so let's think of this in terms of our program. Let me see if I can create a new. This is what our Java program, our Android program, currently looks like. We have activity, which is a class created for us by Android. It's one provided to us by Android. One of the options we have there, one of the methods we have is called onCreate. Okay. Another method we have is called onPause. Okay. And then we also have a method called onResume. We haven't really looked at these methods yet, but they are methods available to us. We can either use the default behavior from activity, or we can create our own. Now, let's go back and take a look at our activities that we've defined. We've defined advanced search activity, GPS of plant activity, plant results activity. Let's come back to Argo and draw that again. Oops, looks like I snuck in a new operation there, so we'll delete that. Okay. What I'll do is I'm going to click on this class and I'm going to click the arrow sitting here, which means I want a subclass activity. I'm going to subclass activity, and we're going to say GPS a plant activity. And then remember that we chose to override the method onCreate. So new operation, and we're going to call this onCreate. Okay, there we go. We also decided to make a few of our own methods in GPS of plant activity. Search clicked, on take photo clicked, on resume, a few of the methods. Let's just put in one of those. Let's put in search clicked. So note that we decided to make our own, I'm getting myself in trouble here. Apparently I was a little trigger happy. And one more. Okay, there we go. Okay, we decided to make our own method called onSearchClicked or something to that nature. Okay, and there we go. GPS of plant activity. Shoot, and it looks like my extras have come away. Okay. 1 second as I clean this up. Okay, I think we took care of it there. Okay, so this is our GPS of plant activity. We also have, if I click on activity, we also have a class called Advanced Search Activity. I think we had one called something like Plant Results Activity. Yeah, Plant Results Activity. And there we go. In each of these, we overrode the onCreate method. That means we duplicated this method name in our subclass. Again, the subclass is what's at the bottom of this arrow. We duplicated that method name in our subclass, and we provided behavior that is specific to that subclass. Okay, we provided behavior specific to that subclass. So if we look at GPS of plant activity, what we're going to see is that we have an onCreate method, but inside of this method, we have a bunch of logic that is specific to our GPS of plant class. Okay, so we're providing specific logic for our GPS of plant class. You'll notice the very first line is super.onCreate. The very first line is super.onCreate. Now, what is that? We never explained that. We just magically left it there. What that means is if I'm in this method, I am overriding this method up here, so I'm hiding it. But if there's logic up here I want to borrow, I just call super.onCreate, and it goes up to that super class and invokes this onCreate method. Okay, goes up to the super class and invokes that onCreate method, which typically is a good idea. And that's why that first line is super.onCreate. It's going to the super class, and it's invoking that default behavior. As a matter of fact, if you look at a lot of the other methods we've overridden, like onActivityResult, note that the first thing it will do is it will call super to make sure it doesn't lose any of that logic in the super class. If we look at onResume, super.onResume, again going upstairs and calling the logic in the onResume method up above. Now GPS of plant activity, we say that extends activity. That word extends is what sets up this magic line. GPS of plant extends activity. GPS a plant extends activity. An activity is one of the basic, most important classes. Shouldn't say basic, but one of the most important classes that we have in Android programming. This is a class that's provided to us as part of the Android development kit. So if we scroll up, we'll see public class activity. And this has, if we take a look here, it has our friend onCreate, which we'll talk more about in just a moment. There's quite a bit of documentation because this is an important class, but this is an Android class that's provided to us. We can override it to make an activity that's more specific to our needs. And for the most part, any of these methods you see listed here in this documentation are methods that we can also override if we want to provide any magic behavior. So when I showed you that magic trick of typing on C control space, that's what it means. It's looking up to see what class we extend, and it's looking to see what methods we can override. Okay, so again, I did on resume. I can do this again with on pause. I just have to type a few letters, then control space, and what it's going to do is it's going to look up at the superclass, find out what methods I can override, and then give me the option to override that method. If you take a look here, on pause, override method in activity. And there we go, and save. Okay, we're going to use these methods in a bit. Okay, these methods all perform important functions in the Android activity lifecycle. Let's take a look at that. Okay, this is the Android activity lifecycle. What you'll see is that we go on create, on start, on resume. These are the first three steps. On create means we are creating or initializing this activity for the very first time. And that's why whenever we start an activity, we invoke this, or we override this onCreate method, and we do any kind of initialization that we want to do. Common initialization includes going out and getting references to the different view components that are on the layout, on the screen that we're interacting with. We want to get a reference to those view components so that we can use them in other methods. So onCreate's very important. It's where we get initialized. It's where it's one of the first methods to get called when the activity literally is created. From there we go to onStart, which makes the program visible, makes the activity visible, and from there we go to onResume, which is the state where the user can interact with the user interface. Okay. So onCreate, very important method. OnResume, also very important. OnStart is important, but we don't tend to use it very frequently. OnCreate, OnResume are the two most important. From there, we can go to a partially visible state. If there's something obscuring the screen, like maybe an hourglass or a message box, we go to onPaused. That means that the user can still see the screen in the background, but there's something else that's blocking the user from using that screen directly. We can also go to a hidden state. OnStop can take us to a hidden state, and that means that the screen is totally not visible. The screen is entirely not visible. Okay? It could be covered by another activity, or the user might have hit the home key and gone to a completely different application. These are different things that can happen. Maybe you've swiped to a different application. In any case, if the screen is no longer visible, it goes to a stop state. Okay? If we close the app entirely, we go to a destroy state, and we basically clean up that memory that the application was using. Now what's interesting is that from the resumed state to the paused, we can come back to resume by calling this method onResume. From the paused state to the stopped, we can also go back to onResume by calling three methods: onRestart, onStart, which is the same method here, and onResume, which is the same method here. What does that mean? That's very important. What does that mean? That means if the user is going to interact with our screen, what we're going to do right before is we're going to call onResume. What we're going to do right after If the user dismisses the screen entirely or closes the app, we're going to go to onPause. So onResume and onPause are two methods that we can override, and we did just see how we overrode them, or made them overridden. And what this means is this is going to be called every time the screen is about to be made visible. This is going to be called every time the screen is about to be made not visible. And these are all methods. Every method you see here is a method that we can override. OnRestart, OnStart, OnResume, OnPause, OnStop, OnDestroy. And again, by override, let's take, for instance, OnStart. It means I can type ONST, hold Control Space, boom, there we go, and override it, and Eclipse will figure out what the method looks like and fill that in for me. So these are all methods that we can override, which means that we can do any special behavior on the onResume. We can do any special behavior on the onPause as well. So we can set things up to be used and onResumed. We can take them apart or pause them when we go to onPause. I say this because this is very important for what we're going to do next in our hands-on activity, which is GPS. Because when the GPS screen is active, we want to be showing GPS updates. But GPS is very expensive. So as soon as the screen becomes inactive, we want to disable the GPS. I learned this lesson the hard way. When I first wrote an app that used GPS, I was curious to see how frequently I would get updates. So I turned the GPS on, and what happened is I had toasts pop up when the GPS was running. And then I saw that it updated very frequently, so I closed my app. I kept getting toasts, okay, because I didn't properly tell the GPS to stop running as soon as the app went invisible. Okay, so if you're using GPS, which we'll do in our next lesson, you definitely want the started and the paused methods. You definitely want to take advantage of those two methods, and we will do that in our next lecture. So in any case, this lecture is hitting about the 22-minute mark, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up with a review. The review is that we have some software called Argo Uml that allows us to write a class diagram. In our class diagram, we can specify things like a superclass, a subclass. We show the relationship with an arrow. Subclass points to superclass. Subclass points to superclass. Subclass points to superclass. Subclasses can inherit methods, certain methods and certain attributes from a superclass. Subclasses can inherit certain methods and attributes from a superclass. The example frequently used in programming is to have a superclass called account, a savings class which extends that and provides little additional behavior, or pretty much a vanilla copy, a checking account with lots of additional behavior, and an overridden method that provides any logic specific to this class, and then a certificate of deposit. We know we can set up this relationship from subclass to superclass by using this keyword called extends. And extends will tell us what class we can extend, okay? And then that also tells us what methods we can override. And if we kind of know the name of a method, we can start typing it, hold Control and hit space, and it will autocomplete. Now, one thing I didn't say, what if we don't know the name of the method? We can look up the documentation if there is any, or we can hold Control and press O. In Eclipse, hold Control and press O one more time, and this will give us a list of all of those methods that we can override. There are quite a few here, but this will give us a list of all of the methods that we can override from the superclass. So that's a bit of fundamental object-oriented programming and how it relates to the Android operating system. In our next video, we'll take a look at GPS and how we can use the GPS service along with our onResume and onPause to make an effective GPS application. Thank you.